Back in the 70s, the indie filmmaker George Lucas had a basic idea for a movie, something like a space western inspired by Flash Gordon. He even tried to acquire the rights for Flash Gordon but could not get them, and so he thought, why not creating my own universe? He started research and created a draft script that he called the Star Wars. But sadly, space as a setting in film was dead in the 70s. The studio bosses who gave the funds did not believe in space films nor in his concept. Not even Disney, which is quite funny from today's perspective. Fortunately, Lucas' success with his film American Graffiti, where he also worked with Harrison Ford, allowed him to get some attention and finally find funding with 20th Century Fox, who were not totally convinced either, and he should later make the film deal of the century. I compress the story a bit. With his previous film nominated for 5 Oscars in 1974, even though he did not win one, he could have claimed a higher salary, but instead passed on it if he could keep the merchandise and sequel rights for his The Star Wars. The studio agreed because they did not believe in a huge success, and back in the 70s, merchandise was not what it is today. Actually, Star Wars probably changed this. We all know how the story ends. The indie filmmaker George Lucas, who was quite shy and did not like large groups of people, with the vision to make a movie nobody believed in, somehow after a chaotic production managed to make a movie and create a franchise everyone still talks about 40 years later, boosting the science fiction genre in films and reshaping the blockbuster cinema. Even if you don't like Star Wars, just look at what was released after it. Alien, Blade Runner, Dune, Tron, the Star Trek films and the Star Trek series The Next Generation, E.T., Spaceballs, maybe Terminator, Robocop, even Flash Gordon and many more. Star Wars laid the foundation for funding films and TV shows in this and related genres again, and gave other filmmakers hope to get funding for more unusual ideas. Interestingly, Star Wars' story of success reflects the plot of the film itself, from the underdog nobody knew to changing the fate of the universe. When we look at John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, things are a bit different. He read school certificate examinations when an idea came to his mind. He wrote it down on an empty sheet of paper. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. The first sentence of his book, The Hobbit. With this, he started writing a small story in his free time, probably with his children in mind. That was in the early 30s of the last century. When he released The Lord of the Rings, he became quite popular and even sick of it. About 86 years after he started with The Hobbit, he has sold over 150 million books and has influenced the fantasy genre like no other. A thing that Tolkien and Lucas have in common, they probably never expected this amount of success influencing generations and changing the landscape of their medium and genre. But that's not the only thing both have in common. Lucas definitely had many influences and inspirations that in the end became Star Wars. If we look at C-3PO and many other designs in Star Wars, we can see some parallels to Fritz Lang's amazing film Metropolis from 1927. It's a true classic, one of the first science fiction films ever made and a masterpiece of the German expressionism in film. We also find influences from other movies and stories. For example, if we read through an early iteration of the Star Wars script, we also find a connection to Tolkien in the following dialogue between Luke and Obi-Wan. You probably have heard this one before, and I actually can't believe it existed, though it never made it into the final script of Star Wars, probably because of the strong similarities to the Hobbit dialogue. But with this in mind, we can look for little parallels in the stories of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Of course, they don't translate one to one, but just this little reference shows that Lucas knew Tolkien's works, and we find a lot of parallels in the story. Some of those I will list are maybe a bit stretched. If we look at Luke, he meets one of his most important allies, Han Solo, in a bar, like Frodo meets Strider in The Prancing Pony. Luke has Obi-Wan, this old and wise man in his unusual and recognizable robes at his side, and he seems like a wizard. We can see some parallels between Obi-Wan and Gandalf. If we maybe extend it a bit, Saruman has powers through his voice and can convince people, like Obi-Wan can convince the stormtroopers by using the Force. Another good example is the confrontation with Darth Vader and the first Death Star. In this scene, Obi-Wan sacrifices himself fighting Darth Vader, almost saying something like, "Fly, this is a foe beyond any of you." But he would come back from the dead in a new form and aid Luke and his friends further, a parallel to Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. He even explains that if Vader should kill him, that he would become more powerful than Vader could ever imagine. A thing true for Gandalf too, as Gandalf the White has now the power and authority to break Saruman's staff, and ordinary weapons can't hurt him anymore. In both stories, just small things decide about victory or failure. For example, when this guy asks if he should destroy the escape capsule of C-3PO and R2-D2, the story could have ended. If Bilbo would not have gone with Thorin on his quest, not only would the dwarf have failed, but also the One Ring would not have been found, and with this, Sauron had a very good chance to win. A small detail that caused an avalanche. R2-D2 is carrying the Death Star plans, with the evil Empire hunting for them to get back their precious. Should the Empire get the plans back before the rebels can analyze the data, the Death Star couldn't be destroyed and the Empire would have won, quite similar to the One Ring. Darth Vader and Sauron share some similarities. At the beginning, nobody knows what is behind Vader's mask. He is just an evil entity, putting fear into the hearts of everyone. This probably also implies for the Emperor, who stays a mystery throughout the classic trilogy. Both Vader and the Emperor are less characters, but more like constructs. A difference is though that Vader becomes more and more a real character over the course of the films, and even has character development. Sauron does not have this, but parts are reflected through other characters like Gollum or Saruman, who also see some character development. This is maybe a bit stretched, but both Luke and Frodo lose a body part on their journey. At least both of them have to go to their limit during the adventure. Another interesting parallel, stormtroopers and orcs are both mostly cannon fodder, even though their style is very different. They wear their helmets and just follow the orders of their masters, but you never connect to them or feel sorry, very much like the orcs of Sauron. Most movies do not really explore the stormtroopers more in depth. I remember the animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars exploring those more as characters. Of course, all those parallels are not simply copies, but inspirations, and also part of the formula of the so-called hero's journey narratology. This is quite an old concept we can find in many mythologies, and both Tolkien's works and Lucas' Star Wars have many connections to mythology. Lucas credited Joseph Campbell as a big influence, who wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, published 1949, so long after the release of The Hobbit. In this book, Campbell discusses mythology and his theory of an archetype hero concept, what he called the monomyth, that seems to be present in a lot of mythologies. Lucas' Star Wars seems to follow this concept. Depending on who you ask nowadays, a hero's journey often consists of elements like the underdog nobody protagonist living a simple and common life at the beginning, followed by a great event that will impact his life massively and is often connected to a powerful evil antagonist, introducing probably supernatural elements. The protagonist meets a wise teacher who has often connections to the antagonist or the event, followed by the hero making further important allies and friends. Often, the hero slowly discovers that he is the chosen one who can beat the evil, or let's say his fate is bound to all of this. Often his teacher dies on his way and he experiences some throwbacks which help the hero to learn and develop. Finally, the hero is strong enough, still struggles but can defeat the evil in the end, often in a close battle. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Tolkien's concept is a bit different though, at places. For example, Frodo and Sam are not the classic chosen ones, but feel more like getting into it by accident. The structure of the hero living a simple and common life is very strong in Tolkien's works though. Fate has chosen them, but they don't discover supernatural strengths in themselves. That's also why the characters work so well. They struggle a lot, are very human, and only their courage stands out. And actually, they fail at the end. Frodo can't destroy the One Ring, like others before him couldn't too, probably more powerful than he is. Now fate takes the rest of what was supposed to happen. All the superpowers, force and might are with others, not with the simple hobbits. In the end, Frodo's adventures were so demanding and his wounds so deep that he can't ever live happy in Middle-earth again, not even in the Shire, and he has to leave forever to a place like heaven. In contrast, Luke and his friends save the day. Luke becomes a Jedi Master, securing the future of the Jedi Order, and Han gets the girl. The tone is very different, but we can see some elements that occur in both works. Of course, neither did Tolkien nor Lucas invent this concept, but I would argue Tolkien at least showed how this, in combination with his own deep mythology, can create a powerful and epic story that fascinated and influenced generations. I would say he made the concept and this type of fantasy very popular. I think a powerful part is also that both creators understood mythology. Myths always tell stories where fate is important and where plot points are strongly connected. We as humans often search for meaning, and seeing the actions of characters having meaning and purpose in a story deeply fascinates us. We can also learn something about our culture and past in mythologies. Not the past in the sense of history, but in the sense of what was important to people back in the day when the myth was created. What lessons, inspirations and values did the storytellers of old want to give the next generations? In one of my previous videos, I think it was about difficulty in games, I talked a bit about why we play games and why playing games is quite important. My theory was to practice without consequences. I think mythologies or fictional stories also have this component. They prepare our mind for situations, invoking thoughts that we can develop further. In this context, mythologies often have some kind of lesson they want to teach, but they also have a contrast in the form of secrets that plays with our curiousness. Tolkien was masterful at explaining things in extreme detail, but also keeping some secrets, like Tom Bombadil. In Star Wars, we have many different species and creatures of unknown origin in the background. The mysterious Force, the Jedi Order, and its origins, but also the mysterious Sith. Seeing those who seem to know secrets of old and becoming powerful through knowing them in a way no other can be powerful is a strong motive. If we think of Saruman in Lord of the Rings, he becomes leader of the White Council because his knowledge of the devices of Sauron is the greatest. But Lucas builds more contrasts if we think about the conversation between Vader and the Imperial generals arguing what is more powerful, the Force or their new battle station, the Death Star, and how Vader is a relic of an old religion. Interestingly, Lucas got a lot of trouble when he started to demystify and explain those secrets in his later movies. It took away some of the magic that fascinated people. To this day, there are many secrets in Tolkien's universe, and sometimes I wish Tolkien had written more, but I'm also thankful that there is still mystery in his world and so many unanswered questions. I think this is also part of what a good fictional universe needs. Another needed element is an ending. I think we live in a time where many stories are getting less desperate to end a story, to have the option for a sequel, a tendency I personally dislike. In this context, we have the new Star Wars Trilogy, but it's quite interesting that also Tolkien worked on a sequel to Lord of the Rings for some time, called The New Shadow, but he quickly abandoned the idea after just 13 pages. In letter 256 we can read, "I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing." I think Tolkien realized this and that continuing a story needs a story to tell that was not already told. In my opinion, a very wise decision. With this, the ending of Lord of the Rings becomes finite and powerful, having meaning. Same with Luke when he threw his lightsaber away, ready to die and becoming the truest and most powerful Jedi in existence, winning in the end over Vader, which sealed the doom of the Emperor. This pacifistic message at the end was definitely influenced by the time or zeitgeist the movies were created in, but in my opinion created a powerful moment and another similarity to Lord of the Rings. In the end, it is pity for others and patience that lead to the destruction of the One Ring, a lesson taught by Gandalf to Frodo. How exactly all came together at the end is another story and also a secret. The human is a very curious creature. Keeping this curiosity alive and letting us develop our own thoughts, tales and ideas in our minds is a powerful tool of the storyteller. And that we are speaking even today about those stories shows what amazing storytellers those men are. Thank you for watching.